Hello, my name is Isolde Jennings and I work in Gabriele Malari's team in Marketing Services. I've just come back from the Innovation Roundtable in Copenhagen, and rather than creating a PowerPoint with my findings, I thought it would be more interesting to create a very short video detailing what I learned over the 3 days. So I'm here at the Innovation Summit in Copenhagen. Got my coffee, very important. It's a lovely day. I'm walking along by the water and I'm looking forward to learning lots of new things. So day one of the Innovation Roundtable started with Aaron Bjork, who is a program manager at Microsoft. And he spoke about how Microsoft became more agile after they missed the boat on the smartphone. So key takeaways from this was that 1, they moved to much shorter sprints of 3 weeks. But 2, they gave colleagues much more autonomy, mastery and purpose. So they incorporated things like self-selecting teams where employees were allowed to actually pick the things they worked on, which meant that they really cared about it. So that was really inspiring. And one thing that I loved that he said was that minimize the cost of failure, not minimize failure itself. So it's not about having less failure, it's just making sure that when you do fail, it doesn't cost the business so much. Next up was 3M, who are a 100-year-old organisation, and everyone at some point probably is 3 meters from a 3M product right now. For us in innovation, we definitely are, because we've probably got a post-it near us. So they foster innovation through initiatives, including their famous 15% culture, where you're allowed to spend 15% of your working day on something that you're personally driving. And also by empowering everybody to have ideas. So masking tape was actually invented by a clever sandpaper salesman who went into a lot of car factories and realized that they had an issue with their paint. So that's just one example of how that culture has really worked for them. And what I also loved was that this has been a culture that has been driven for a long time. So in the 1940s, the chairman of 3M said, hire good men and women and trust them to do the job. And I love that. And he also did say women, so ahead of their time. Next up, we had Anders Jarvesen from Spotify, who spoke about their famous agile organization. They get things done by having non-hierarchical squads and with multiple skill sets to achieve an ultimate goal. And that's been inspired a lot of organizations to copy this model.
So instead of talking about these agile principles of continuous delivery or continuous iteration, you can talk about how do we experiment and learn rapidly? How do we deliver value continuously? How do we make people awesome? How do we have psychological safety in our team? How do we make it safe to fail? These are discussions that are really, really important for you to have as a company when you start building this culture. And it's really, really important to have this in place for real innovation to happen as well.
Then we had a lab. At the labs, we had Jonathan Pinsky, people like Jonathan Pinsky who are academics, who actually got us to do a little bit of work. And I was sitting at a table with somebody from Swarovski, somebody from Roche, and actual Anders from Spotify too. And we spent most of the half an hour actually talking about what could be the big disruptors in our organizations. So the lab actually focused on business model generation. And that was a really interesting discussion because we were from such a variety of businesses and had lots and lots of different sort of concerns and challenges to think of. Last but not least, we had the Venerable Mohan Swani, who took us through his 10 innovation principles. And basically, these are 10 innovation principles, I won't go through them all, that if you're going to start a company from scratch to make it the most innovative, you would follow these principles. And they're quite sort of straightforward, but quite hard to do if you have already an established company. And so that was the end of day 1. Now we have day 2. So day 2 actually started with Microsoft again. So it was their accelerator, which is called Scale Up. And the interesting thing about Microsoft Scale Up is that it is not about money. So no money exchanges hands with the startups that they have in their accelerator. It is all about connections. So startups have to be mature. And what they mean by mature is they have to already have received 6 million plus funding. And they have to be in the B2B space. Also, they love nerds. So this kind of phrase epitomizes this. Don't be a know-it-all, be a learn-it-all. So that's kind of like the type of people that they're looking to have in their organization. Next, we actually had a roundtable discussion, and this time it was actually a hosted roundtable with Roche Diagnostics. And they were really interested about innovation competitions and how to make them work. So, this idea of ongoing innovation versus event innovation, where you have like company-wide competition to have ideas. And one of the most interesting things that one of the other companies was doing was this idea of innovation leave. So this was from a company called Fortum, which is a utilities company in the Nordics. And they have innovation leave, which is just like maternity leave. And one gentleman who was a horse rider used his innovation leave to develop a company that made energy by burning horse manure. And he is actually now the head of this business. So it's been very successful. So I love that, innovation leave. Finally, the end note of day 2 was from Linda Hill, who is a professor at Harvard Business School. And she is actually an ethnographer, and she has looked into the qualities of innovation leaders around the globe. And what she found was that they garnered a culture and created a culture of democracy and nurtured ideas. And so a great example of this is Ed Catmull, who she has studied, who is actually the founder of Pixar. So we always think about Steve Jobs when we think about Pixar, but Ed is very much responsible for Pixar's success. So Pixar have a culture where everyone's ideas matter. And there is a really interesting reason to why babies are always credited at the end of Pixar movies. And that is because of this culture that he fostered, that when they accidentally deleted Toy Story 2 from the server of their computers, they actually found the file on the home computer of a lady who'd just gone maternity leave because she just had a baby. And that just shows you that they're kind of fostered this culture where everybody cared so much about what they were doing that in the end it saved the day. Now we have day 3. So day 3 was started off by MIT's David Robertson, who talked about the third way to innovate, the power of little ideas. So rather than being too disruptive or thinking too narrowly, you think around the box. And a great example that he gave was about Gatorade. So rather than bring out lots of new flavors, which is what they had been doing, they thought about what athletes needed and organized their range around that. So they had products that were for before, during and after exercise. And that was them thinking around the box. I thought that was a really clever kind of phrase. Then we had Gina O'Connor from Rensselaer, and she was talking about the emerging job roles that you need for breakthrough innovation. And so this was an interesting one in terms of how she actually thought about how these job roles would be broken down. So that in the organization, you would have them grouped in 3 ways. So there's discovery, which is where you're having the ideas and you do the initial research. There's incubation, where you actually grow the ideas. And then there's acceleration, where you actually think about how you launch these ideas. And you would have people of multiple different levels and different skill sets in these areas. So that was just one way of thinking about how you could organize in an organization. And thinking about people, the Heartfulness Institute, which is actually a mindfulness and meditation organization around the globe, a not-for-profit, ran a meditation session. And what the thinking behind that was is that actually you can make the fight or flight part of your brain smaller as you meditate, which means that the creative part of your brain gets bigger. So the idea is that if you perform a small meditation every morning, maybe that will actually help you think better. And now coming to one of my favorites, Lego. So Magnus Goransson, who is the director of their Play Lab, spoke about failure. And he actually called himself, I am Mr. Failure. So he has a failure rate of he's had 200 initiatives and 150 of them have failed. So he wanted to talk about the reason projects fail. And he felt ultimately it was about having a lack of a champion. And he felt that you really needed to nurture your champions and really care about your champions. And that's so to be observant and be gentle with them. And that was the ultimate way that you would succeed in innovation. So again, look after your champions. I thought that was a really lovely one. And then last but not least, we have Tom Kelly from IDEO. So I was really excited to see Tom Kelly. And the event was ended by this, and he really was inspiring in terms of that he talked about how creativity was going to be the next big skill, especially in the context of AI and where we're going with that. And I think for all of us in our organization, that's actually really heartening, because we've got creativity in abundance. So that was how the Innovation Roundtable ended. So I think ultimately the headlines are that empathy and relationships are really important, and also creativity needs to be nurtured. So really inspiring 3 days in Copenhagen, and I hope you enjoyed my rundown.